The next hour, we want to talk about something that happened on this day 60 years ago. On the 14th day of December 1963, 2 days after Kenya attained independence, the People's Republic of China established diplomatic relations with Kenya. And among the first capitals where Kenya sent ambassadors was Beijing, China. The others were New York, London, Egypt, and Moscow. And since then, it's been 60 years of diplomatic relations where Kenya has been sending ambassadors to Beijing, and China has also been sending ambassadors to Kenya and maintaining relations. One of the people who has served as Kenya's ambassador to China is Ruth Sereti Solitei. She's our guest now. Good morning, Balozi.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to this show.
Karibu sana. We call that the hot seat of the Situation Room. How does it feel?
Very hot, actually.
No, come on. No, it's not. it's easy.
I will try.
To welcome you to the conversation, the gentleman sitting across you is called C.T. Muga, and C.T. every week picks one African country. He studies the proverbs that are from that country, and he comes and gives us 5, one per day, Monday to Friday. This week, he's in the country of Djibouti.
Yes, whose capital city is Djibouti. Now, in the previous hour, previous hour, they asked me, who is the president? Well, this is interesting. Djibouti has only had 2 presidents. 2. They got their independence in 1977. Yep. You may not think so. The first president, what they call the inaugural holder, was a gentleman by the name of Hassan Abtidan. Okay? The current president is a gentleman by the name of Hassan Omar Guila. That's the name of the president. Now, it is a very strange place in that the majority of the people actually live in the city. 70% of the population actually live within the city. The other 30% live outside the city. Djibouti is actually considered to be an extremely poor country. Not much agriculture to speak of. And perhaps it explains why people live within the city. Anyway, more about Djibouti, story for another day.
Okay.
The
proverb.
proverb.
And Balozi, listen to the proverb, because you're going to help us interpret the proverb.
The mighty tree falls, and the little birds scatter in the bush.
Mighty tree falls, and the little birds scatter in the bush.
Yes.
Great. It's a very interesting one. Wow. The mighty tree falls, and the little birds scatter in the bush.
Yes, they do.
So you'd like me to interpret this?
Yes.
Please.
To me, that may sound like there's a dependence somewhere between the bird and the tree, or the bush and the tree. And neither the little bird could be the little country. If one big country or one major partner disintegrates, then those who depend on it might also fall. I don't know whether that is...
Oh, you actually brought in an analogy we hadn't actually considered, because you brought in the relationship and the relevance of the bush. You see, we were thinking in the previous hour, we thought of the birds scattering. But you see, they leave the high perch that was represented by the big tree. They now move to a smaller, lower perch. Yes. And it's because the
Bush.
Yes. The bush was there, it's available.
The bush existed.
But it was not their preferred
abode.
No. But now, the abode that they were in has now gone to the level of the bush, because when it collapses, it's now horizontal. So the big tree and the bush are not in terms...
So don't despise the bush.
Don't despise the bush.
Because of the big tree.
No, don't. Well put, Eric. Yes.
Usitukane wakunga hali kizazi kingalipo.
Yes.
Or something.
Of that sort.
Maembe ni ya msimu.
Yes.
Someone says, was it Balozi, that Mama J is saying, it must be so nice to be called Balozi. Is it?
Well,
How does it feel when people call you Ambassador Balozi?
it is an honor to be appointed an ambassador of your country to another country. Whether the country is a small country or a big country, it's still a great honor because you're representing the whole of the Kenyan population. And for me, I am really grateful that the government at that time chose that I be ambassador of Kenya to China, the People's Republic of China. The biggest population in the world is the one that I lived among and worked with for 5 years, thanks to the government of Kenya. Yeah, so
When did you serve as ambassador?
I was appointed in January of 2004, being a career diplomat. For me, then it was like, you've gone to the peak of your career. So that's when I was appointed ambassador, 2004 January. And I was in another station then. So, of course, I came home to prepare myself to go get the briefs, get the credentials. And then I proceeded to China, and I worked there until December of 2008. Yes.
How long have you worked in the diplomatic service?
Wow. I joined the diplomatic service in 1984, straight after university.
That's many years. So you're among the people who have actually worked in this service and risen to level of ambassador, representing the country, right?
Yes.
So therefore, when you're with this appointment, it was just a promotion and moving to a new station. But then there was a significance of this station. At the point of your appointment, it's a point when Kenya was, now if the whole country was seeing China as what China is, and China's relations with Kenya was starting to be more public in terms of engagement. Did you feel the pressure?
Oh, definitely. It was a promotion, but again, you're appointed ambassador at the pleasure of the president. So not everybody who gets to the level I was at rises to become ambassador.
Yep.
So you see, it's quite special to be appointed ambassador.
Yeah.
The time is that I was appointed, that was during the late President Mwai Kibaki's time. He had just he was promoting what he called the Look East policy.
Yep.
And the Look East policy was actually to give Kenya the opportunity to diversify its relations with other countries and pursue its interests that would be economically beneficial with other countries other than the West that we traditionally were really having a strong partnership with. So it was not really, there wasn't pressure, I would say, but it was a situation where I was working in an environment that also mutually was willing and prioritizing strengthening its relations with Africa, and indeed with Kenya. Also considering that China did not just become an interested country in Kenya or in Africa when we established diplomatic relations in 1960. But if you look at the history of China and Africa, or the east coast of Africa, it dates back to centuries and centuries ago. Way back before Vasco da Gama landed on the East African coast, a Chinese explorer by the name of Zhong Hu had already made some voyages to our coast. And at some point, one of his ships capsized. And there's evidence to that effect from what was found in the wreckage. So when I went in there was already that developing or long-standing relations that we'd had with China. And it was now just getting to the level where we are beginning to see the benefits. And Mwai Kibaki took advantage of that.
Sure.
Yes.
But also, even as you look at that, it's interesting because in 2004, which is the year that you went into China, we had started to see the beginnings of China then take this position, global or geopolitics, whereby they said, look, we've almost come to the end of our introspection in terms of development, and now we're looking at the world and taking on the persona that other countries like the US had done, and other countries in Western Europe. And so China was now establishing itself as that global big brother that folks could come to. Did it affect the relationship then between Kenya and China? Because you've talked about years ago before the 60s, whereby there was already camaraderie between the two nations. But then we now see China really establishing itself in the world, and then maybe not at that point opening up its hands as such, but it was clear that it was going to be a country to be reckoned with. Did it tinker with that relationship in any way?
It was actually, as you rightly said, China had started to open up to the world. And they also had that opening up policy that they were implementing. It was time for China to go out also and strengthen its relations with other countries. And I believe that Kenya was one of those priority countries for China, being the gateway into Africa. There was that expectation that China would play a key role in China's own development, in furthering its trade and investments, in furthering in opening up to the world for us to understand, or for the world to understand what China is all about, what it had to offer the world. So it was rightfully the right time, and it was also a few years before I went there, 2000, that's when China and Africa developed or established what is called the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation, which is a platform on which then relations between China and Africa were structured on mutual respect, mutual desire to have a beneficial relationship, not just with Africa as a whole, but with individual countries like Kenya. So, yeah, it was a good time for. It was a time really that that Africa or China opened up to the world, and specifically to Africa. Yeah, in the 2000s. Yeah, and it was a good time for me to be there. A very exciting time.
I wonder, Balozi.
Yes.
What brief did you go to Beijing with? This is the time when President Mwai Kibaki is looking at, I need to jumpstart this economy. I need to have serious infrastructural development. I need to look at partners who can come and help Kenya in this journey. I have big projects. I've got a thicker superhighway, more road infrastructure, airports, and all this and the other. And I need these guys to give me money. What was your brief? Was your brief to go and sell projects? What was it? What were your marching orders? Because you said from your other station, you came back to Kenya to receive your brief. What was it?
You realize that Mwai Kibaki had just become president the year before. And he, of course, like any other government, had his priorities. And for the East, which was not just China, but specific Asian countries, he was looking at how then can the success of those countries be beneficial to Kenya. And my brief included looking at those priority areas, which was infrastructure, but then we had dilapidated infrastructure in Kenya. There was need to expand our trade. What then could we do to reduce the balance of trade? So we're looking at tourism, because we may not be very competitive with some of the products that we produce in Kenya, but with tourism and looking at the population of China, and that China was already looking at getting out into the world, then we needed to strengthen our relations in terms of in tourism. We already had very many existing bilateral agreements. Some may have been a little bit dormant. So part of my brief was to go and look at what bilateral agreements needed to be reactivated. What bilateral agreements were coming to an end or about to expire, so that we could renegotiate them. Some were like the cultural agreement, education. There were numerous. And during my time, I had a lot of delegations coming from Kenya, actually an exchange of delegations to actually then renegotiate or negotiate or expand and deepen the already existing cooperation. So my brief was really to go and enhance what was there, as well as implement the new or assist the government implement the new policy that it had.
Let me ask in a different way. Were you told to go there with a begging bowl, or were you told to go there with a marketing brochure?
Well, it was not a begging bowl. No, because Kenya also has something to offer to China. So there was no begging bowl that I went with. the instructions were go and enhance the relations that are there, find what are the new opportunities that we can explore, and we shall do that. And the government was fully in support of the activities that we had. Yeah,
it was a bold move at the time. I say bold because the movement of many African nations at that point in time seemed to have been towards the West. And I sometimes wonder what it is that got President Kibaki to think in that direction. Because you look at the history of his politics and his leaning, it was never in that direction. And then he becomes president, and it's not just him. There's a whole troop of other presidents on the continent. They also trooped to China to have this conversation with the Chinese. So is it that we as a nation or we as a continent thought of that movement, or had the Chinese been making overtures and making invitations, and we decided to take up the invitation? Because we had relations with China from the time we got independence anyway, but the sort of relations that we're now speaking of had never been in existence, not really. Tanzania was more, the relation between China and Tanzania was more pronounced, it was more evident, but not so. We can.
Well, you have to look at the geopolitics of the time, like you said. There was the bipolar system of international relations.
The Cold War.
The Cold War was in existence. But now, the world was changing. There was need to get out of the political kind of orientation of, where you just look at the politics, but look at the actual development or the actual, what is that you're benefiting from your relations? What does it come with? And Kibaki was looking at the economics. What are we benefiting? What are we getting from the West, our traditional partners? What is existing in the East that we had sort of not paid much attention to? And he was looking at, they have fantastic infrastructure. They have, of course, there were, the financial part of it, the grants that we would get from China. So he was looking at the economic benefits of what is in the East, what is in China, what can China offer economically to change or to help Kenya rise from where it was.
Ambassador, very many things happened from the time you were there up to present, even before, but in those years, let's just say the last 20 years, a lot has happened. We've seen an increase in the number of Chinese visitors to Kenya, and that's Chinese tourists. We've seen an increase in the number of investments that are linked to Chinese investors in the country. We've also seen an increase in the number of Kenyans who have moved to China. Let's talk about that. In terms of Kenyans moving into China for education or for work, what kind of groundwork did you have to lay?
Thank you very much for that question. Excuse me. In terms of Kenyans moving to China, at the time we had a number of scholarships that China was offering to Kenyans. And what one of the things I did was to request for an increase in the number of scholarships, because I think China was offering, was it about 50 scholarships then per year? But then I did have a conversation with the Ministry of Education of China to request that we enhance those scholarships, because there were some countries that are already getting so many, and the numbers were still very low. So then, there was that renegotiation of that agreement to ensure that more Kenyans then are able to access Chinese institutions of higher learning. And the other thing we did in terms of Kenyans moving to China was to, constantly promote the relations in whichever we could between the Chinese and Kenya, because it has to be a two-way thing. And one of the other things we did was to organize exhibitions for marketing Kenya, and then Kenyans, like for example, we talked about the potential of tourists or tourism enhancement between Kenya and China by ensuring that Kenyans are able to relate to the Chinese, understand their way of doing things, understand what their interests are in tourism. And we had a few exhibitions where we got Kenyans to come and also visit and see what and interact with the Chinese so that they could have that kind of a two-way traffic.
Yeah.
And we also promoted Kenyan products, tea. We had events to promote our tea, and then that made Kenyans come to China. And we also worked with some private sector to bring Kenyans to China to visit. There was a big fair in Guangzhou, Guangdong province. It's one of the biggest industrial capitals in China. So, there would be these organized groups of Kenyans that would come, especially at the time when Kenya Airways had just started flying to China. It was flying to Hong Kong, but started flying to mainland China. So Kenyans would come. And just mentioning Kenya Airways, of course, we worked on establishment of a bilateral air services agreement that then saw Kenya Airways actually flying to mainland China. So that was a good way of getting Kenyans to move into China. But the Chinese, I think it wasn't too hard for the Chinese to start coming out to Kenya. It was much easier for them because they even had the products to come and sell, and there was a very big interest being taken on Chinese products. They're affordable. You can get anything for whatever amount you want to pay. And it was also, the policy of the government for Chinese to go out and seek opportunities outside China.
Which is where I want to bring in the next question. Oftentimes, our diplomats are accused, maybe fairly, maybe unfairly, of going to these other countries, and instead of marketing Kenyan produce, they market Kenya as a market for the produce from those other countries. So we see an influx of goods that are manufactured from China coming into Kenya, but we don't see an influx or outflux of Kenyan products going into China. What would you say about that? I mean, why don't we see an increase, a commensurate increase in the balance of trade between the two countries?
I think we need to realize that each country grows at its own pace, and China had already grown at a very fast rate, and it is a manufacturing country, and they have already marketing within the country, but there is also a big market out there, Kenya included. And Kenya's economy is more dependent on agriculture, primary goods. And so, to compete between Kenya and China and trying to balance the trade is not a very easy thing to do. And, we have a very limited range of products that we can export. It may be very hard for us to export anything we manufacture in Kenya into China. So we rely on, tea or agricultural produce to export to China. And, the value, a lot of times we were exporting things that had not been value added. So to achieve a balance of trade between basic products and manufactured products is not very easy. And that is why then we were looking at tourism, because it is a very direct a foreign exchange earner that even has a multiplier effect. If you have, I'll just give an example, 500,000 Chinese coming into Kenya, you can imagine the impact it would have on the rest of the economy of Kenya, the transport, the food industry, the service industry, hospitality, and all that. So that is where we have the challenge of achieving a balance of trade because of the products we have and the products that they have.
But then we see, just from what you've mentioned, that there are possibilities. And when we look at the balance of trade, we look at bilateral agreements between two nations, and then you want to ask yourself, with the realization, because it's obvious, we know China manufactures, and the greater percentage of those who buy are within the country. They do they do export. They export labor. They export all sorts of other things. So there's something else that can be done. You're a career diplomat, looking at countries whereby these agreements have been made. You then are the liaison in terms of relationship between Kenya and this other country, China, as we speak of today. So was there the return of information, harping on the insistence, and even as we look forward, saying it's absolutely necessary that whereas Kenya may not be able to send its goods to China, that you can ask for more and more of your people to come here because tourism is also a big issue for them. You work and rest. Can Kenya be where you rest? And shouldn't there be heavy insistence then upon that? Do what you need to do to make sure that you do have your 500 to 1,000 odd tourists who are coming into the country. So the basic of the question is, you know that manufacturing goods cannot go out there. Have there been conversations on the insistence that Kenya is and remains a holiday destination for Chinese tourists? Because then we can see that the numbers then start to meet at some point. Because right now they're polarized, they don't meet. Can there be some kind of insistence on saying, look, this is what we actually can do? Because if not, it actually then does look like it's a begging bowl situation whereby your big brother will take everything from you and you'll take nothing from us.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I need to mention that in terms of trying to reduce the balance of trade between Kenya and China, one of the things that Kenya did, even before I went there, was to establish KTB Kenya Tourist Board representation in Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. And that was part of that strategy to see how we can get more Chinese to visit Kenya. And the other thing that we did now during my time was to get a commercial office established at the embassy to promote our products and to handle all matters of things related to trade and investments. So one of some things that can be done in terms of because I don't think we can ever achieve a balance of trade between Kenya and China, is to get Chinese to invest more in Kenya in value addition of the products that we send to them. I just mentioned we used to sell tea. Of course, in China they drink more of the green tea. Yes. But there's so many ways you can value add tea and get it to be the taste of those that you intend to sell these products for to. So it's a matter of working with them to see how we can value add to our products, how we can enhance investments in products that we have strength in, even the tourism product. We can also improve on it. If you go to China, you'll probably be taken to a mountain somewhere, but you'll go on a cable car. You will enjoy the scenery. There's something to do up there. But when I look at our escarpment here, the Rift Valley, and I'm not trying to cut down anybody, but if we look, for example, at our escarpment here. What have we done to make it a place to go to for the tourists? I remember there was a high-level delegation that came into Kenya when I was ambassador, and part of the program was to go to the viewpoint on the Nairobi-Naivasha Road to see the Rift Valley. But we got there and they were asking, so what?
What more apart from buying this woolen hat?
Yes,
exactly.
What else?
What else? What is it about this Rift Valley?
Yeah.
What can I do? What can somebody come except from just come and see it and take pictures of the valley? What else can we do? So we need to enhance the product we have. We have a lovely product. We need to enhance the experience of the visitor. We need to look at the Chinese and see what is it that would interest them. What would really make them come to Kenya?
What would wow them?
What would wow them to come here? They love the Masai Mara. But they need to improve something there.
Especially if you're saying this is the thing that could get the numbers up there.
Exactly.
This is the thing that Kenya does have that other nations don't have, that China itself doesn't have. Then you want to make sure that you're increasing or that you're making sure that this experience is 1 in a million and that they have no other choice but to go back and say, more of you must come. And that's how the numbers start to increase.
That's true.
So there's work that needs to be done on the home front to start to, because if you're saying that, there's the complaints already that, The relationship is not It's not. You're not moving.
It's not at par.
It's not at par at all.
It's imbalanced.
You know, the relationship is highly imbalanced. And if the desire is to balance it, then there's a lot of work that needs to be done on one side. And 3 guesses to whose side that is.
But also remember that when you talk about foreign aid, the idea or the vision that people have of foreign aid is money being channeled through certain accounts. That's just part of the story.
Or it's free money.
Yes, and usually it's thought to be free. Whenever a country gives you foreign aid, part of what they're actually doing is opening new markets for their own goods. And also enabling their own population to have experiences in ensuring that they understand other terrains. This is something that countries that have been involved in imperialism and colonialism specifically understood. So when you have the Chinese government giving us a loan, and that comes with goods, comes with services, meaning specifically comes with trucks, comes with earth-moving equipment. Those earth-moving equipment at some point will require servicing. They'll require people who actually operate them. And in the process, our people will also learn how to utilize that equipment. But a whole new market will have been opened up for those very, very, very goods. Now, competition that brings about the balance that Ndu is talking about, first of all, what steps have we taken to industrialize? Let's just start there. Okay. So when it comes to industry, where do we are at a stage where perhaps the best thing we can do is learn and hope that we can actually start our own nascent manufacturing or that sort of development.
Yeah.
But when it comes to actually trading, where we can be on an equal footing, is with the things that we are good at. As you say correctly, we have tourism. But the natural resources that we have, the thinking and the talking around how best we can make it attractive, it often ends at talk. Because the Masai Mara more or less remains the Masai Mara. What happens is people build many, many hotels. So after a while, you get the impression there are more hotels than there are animals. Okay? Sorry. It's not entirely true. But but what else do we do to ensure that it's become something more interesting? It's something we talk about. We have all the bodies that are supposed to do it, but what do they do? We have Mount Kenya, for instance. What have we done to make Mount Kenya a tourist attraction?
And that's the thing. I think when you're talking about having a foreign policy, because then a country would have a policy on how it wants to relate with a certain part of the world. Like you're saying, in the first Kibaki administration, there was that Look East policy. And there was focus on that. It needs to work hand in hand with a domestic development policy. So that when you're saying this benefit that we shall accrue from this foreign policy, this is how it shall help us domestically going forward. And I think what I'm hearing, Balozi, is you're saying sometimes there's that mismatch in terms of you are out there, you are doing your job, but you've sent people to come to Kenya as tourists. They have brought in the dollars, the RMBs. Okay, what are we doing with them to attract more and more of those? Is that the gap you're saying?
Yes, thank you for that. Yes, there's that gap that we need to address, which also includes, the product as a whole, including the infrastructure. And until a few years ago, it was almost a nightmare to visit some of our key tourist destinations because the roads were, not there at all, and. So there's a lot that needs to be done. There has to be that connection between the foreign policy, the development policy, and the whatever our relations with the country should really be wholesome. We should be looking at. We want them to come and do something. We want to benefit from this relationship. We also must do something. We also must do something.
What you're saying represents how the Chinese look after their own interests. And we ought to be emulating them and saying, how can we copy? How can we look at what they are doing to look after their own interest so that we can also look after our own interest? But it appears in my mind that the mindset that we've acquired over time is the one of dependency, where we prefer to be in a position where we are constantly dependent. Because if we genuinely wanted to move out of this dependency, then the question I would ask is, what have we been doing to do precisely that? What is it that we've done? Beyond talking, of course. I don't see much evidence of what we have done to move out of this dependency on whether it's aid or whether it's grants, because all our conversations seem to be, how best can we borrow? Yes.
If I can tack onto that question, Balozi, and to say then, after 60 years of this relationship between Kenya and China, even as it's commemorated today, what is there to really celebrate about the relationship? And what then, because we're here, then can you say that Kenya has been able to achieve or glean from this relationship for the last 6 decades? And what should change going forward?
Those are very good questions that have been raised. And what you're asking is, what can we celebrate? There's a lot to celebrate. And maybe not all development, just comes very easily or without certain possible long-term repercussions. But if we look at the Kenya-China relations, aside from having good relations with China diplomatically, aside from being able to access aid and grants and financing, we have had a lot of Kenyans going to study in China who come back with skills. The skills that we need to develop our infrastructure, the skills that we need to in the medical field, the skills that we need to to do so many things that we need to do as a country. There's a lot of celebration actually around the Kenya-China relations. Even at the international fora, we are able to get the support of China where we need to. We support them in certain things. They support us in certain things. We have investments from China, where we then, even if you see as Chinese maybe opening an industry here, Kenyans are employed there. They work there. They're able to make a living. There's a lot of research going on in the forestry sector. How do we maybe, like China is very strong with the bamboo, how, we also learn from them how to better make use of the bamboo that we have. There's a lot. I may not be able to, pinpoint everything, but there's so much that.
But I think that there is something to celebrate. Is the point?
There is a lot to celebrate. There's a lot to celebrate. There's an understanding by the Chinese more about the Kenyans. We understand them better now. The Chinese established the Confucius Institutes in Kenya, where they are able to promote their culture, their language, and Kenyans are able to even learn Chinese so that they can also better interact with the Chinese people, whether out there or here. So there is a lot of things that we can celebrate, that the achievements that we have achieved in the last 60 years.
Do we take such opportunities? For example, we see these big countries, they will want to expand their culture, for people to understand their cultures. That's why they set up the Confucius Institute, and all these countries have those cultural centers. Do we have one in Beijing or in Shanghai or in any part of China where people can walk in and see, this is the culture of the Kenyan people?
We may not be able to do what some of these big countries are doing by opening such institutes like the Confucius Institute, but the embassy, one of the roles of the embassy is to promote the Kenyan culture. And that is why on occasions such as Jamhuri Day, you have that opportunity to showcase your country, either in speech, by hosting a reception, serving Kenyan dishes. But you also find that there are Kenyans who go out there themselves, out of their own initiative, and actually maybe open restaurants. Like I read recently, there's a Kenyan lady that has established a restaurant in China, in Beijing, where she serves Kenyan food. So there are different avenues in which we can promote our culture through the Kenya Tourism Board, through participation in exhibitions, you showcase the culture of the country. So you may not have a permanent office or a permanent establishment like the Confucius Institutes, but we have those opportunities where we can promote the Kenyan culture out there.
Balozi, the headline in today's Business Daily, Kenya a pawn in China's supremacy agenda. This is by an institute called the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, created in 2000 to submit an annual report to Congress on the national security implications of the economic ties between the U.S. and China, and to recommend government action by the U.S. government. Now they're saying that as China was expanding globally, it has gone into these countries, for example, Kenya, and it's using its muscle to subdue Kenya as it expands its own agenda. Having worked there, having worked with the government of China, is this a fair representation?
Okay, I hadn't even seen that. You're bringing it to my attention right now. What I would say is that countries establish relations with others to pursue their own individual interests, and it is really upon a country to know how to manage the relations with another country. And what I know, and I'm not defending China or anything, but there's always it's always being lashed out there, that they're out to subdue countries, they're out to overtake, they're out to recolonize, and things like those. I think there's a need for a lot of public diplomacy to be done where Kenya-China relations are concerned. What is it that we are pursuing as a country? What is it that China is pursuing? Where is our mutual beneficial interest at? Where are we collaborating at? What is the collaboration that is healthy and mutually acceptable to both of us? So there's a lot of that public diplomacy that we need to do.
Balozi, thank you very much for joining us.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.